Wanted to touch on the reason for focusing on attendance to improve outcomes for Aboriginal children. There are several reasons for this, which we'll get to in a minute, but just wanted to touch on the learning from the Best Start program. This is an early years program with one of its aims to improve attendance of Aboriginal children at early years services such as kindergarten, maternal and child health. However, we've learnt from evaluations of programs like Access to Early Learning that strong attendance at kindergarten usually translates into strong attendance at school. So I think it's really important that we learn from this experience. Just to give you a little snapshot of Best Start, the Best Start program uses an improvement approach to improve outcomes for Aboriginal children and children experiencing vulnerability. It aims to improve participation in universal services, as I mentioned earlier, such as MCH, supported playgroups and kindergarten. It's located in 30 sites across Victoria, including DELKAIA Aboriginal Best Start site here in Horsham, and the work basically sets annual targets and partners work toward achieving those targets by making small intentional changes in practice that cumulatively impact the service system. I think that's the most important part to take away. It's around these very small changes in practice. If anyone is interested in the science behind this, we do have a Best Start improvement guide that is available if anyone wanted to actually have a bit more information. One of the key learnings from using an improvement approach in Best Start over the past few years has been that when learning environments are culturally safe and welcoming for Aboriginal families, attendance increases. So what does culturally safe and welcoming mean? In the Best Start context, we've found a couple of things are really important. The first one is celebrating Aboriginal culture daily, not just during important weeks. So while Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week, Sorry Day, they're all really, really important things to recognise. The impact's made when culture is embedded into the daily service delivery. Similarly, displaying the flag is a great starting point, but it should only be thought of as a starting point. The second learning has been around respecting Aboriginal people, which sounds like an absolute no-brainer. However, we don't actually ever very often demonstrate this. So it's around asking families what they want and listening openly to the answer, and most importantly, respecting the response through action. Recognising power imbalances and working to shift that power. So we think of equal partnerships of 50-50, but an equitable partnership is really what we're striving for in the first instance, because we have to acknowledge that we bring a significant level of power to any conversations that we have with Aboriginal families as members of the department. And it's around acknowledging that and then working out how we can actually create some genuine partnerships once we do acknowledge that power imbalance. And the final point is around establishing positive relationships early, listening to people's stories, reinforcing their importance, not working from a shame perspective. So we had an example in DELKAIA Aboriginal Best Start where one of the services changed their enrolment form for the kindergarten so that they asked families at the start of the year, and this was all families, but they were particularly interested in the Aboriginal families' responses. They asked them what would be potentially a barrier to them attending kindergarten. And they sort of put some potential scenarios to them, such as, a child was sick, how would you get to the service, etc. And what that did is reinforce the importance of attending kindergarten without actually saying, 15 hours of kindergarten is really important. You have to make sure that your child is there. And similarly, when they, if the child wasn't attending for some reason, they could give them a call and just say, hey, listen, we had that conversation at the start of the year, just checking in, is everything okay? Is there anything that we can help you with? And so it came from a relationship perspective, not a shame perspective. But interestingly, while we found these as part of our learning from Best Start over the past few years, what we also know is this aligns directly with MARRUNG. And if you have a look here, you'll see that celebrating Aboriginal culture daily, not just during important weeks, aligns directly with MARRUNG vision, MARRUNG principle, MARRUNG priority areas and actions, and MARRUNG actions. So we know that this directly aligns with the framework. And similarly, respecting Aboriginal people aligns directly with the framework too. So everything that we've learnt, we know actually does align with the MARRUNG Aboriginal Education Plan. And so this is where focusing on attendance, focusing on those two key areas in our work can make a real difference and directly aligns with MARRUNG. John Gorton, who is Community Services Manager at Gulum, was generous enough to give up his time to discuss the impact of DELKAIA Aboriginal Best Start. We've uploaded the full video and recommend that you take the 50-odd minutes to listen to his experience, and we'll share the link after the meeting. But for the purpose of today, I've cut down the presentation. Sorry about the editing, I'm not very good at it, but highly recommend you take the time to listen to John share his experiences. We started by getting an understanding of the extent of some of the challenges faced by Aboriginal people in the Wimmera, which is only slightly touched on in this presentation, before talking about the impact that's been made in the area by the DELKAIA Aboriginal Best Start Partnership.
I think it's important for people to know that each Aboriginal person has a story, and whilst some of it may not be as bad as mine, these people are way worse.
Yeah.
And then there's some that have probably had the good experience, and good luck to them. I wish that I had it, but unfortunately I didn't. When the George Floyd thing happened, I seen the video, and it took me a little bit to get to sleep that night, because the trauma that it sort of brings back from all the stuff that's happened to us over the journey. The reason I talked about a lot of this stuff was because it did raise all that trauma that's happened to me, and I've been angry for about 4 weeks now. And even this morning, we've been talking about some of the stuff that's going on around the country with some of the other boys, and it's actually exhausting. It's brought a lot of things to a head, I think, the George Floyd stuff, but really it's okay for people to be standing up and saying, we want change, but we want more than just people saying. We need some doing, we need some actions. The Aboriginal community always consults first and then does things, whereas it seems sometimes the department wants you to build the plan and then consult later, which to me is backwards. So we decided anyway to consult with the people that are in the early years, the families that have kids in the early years services, and then give them the options. Is it the outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we have the 6 outcomes, I think it is, and then they pick which ones that they want or they see as a priority for the community. And then we take the top 2 or 3 outcomes, and then they become our short-term outcomes to help do the work that we're doing within Best Start. From there, we then go on to the PDSAs, and then I guess when we first started, a lot of people wanted to do the big changes, and we broke them down into small steps to get to that big change. And there's been some really big positive changes for our community, particularly in the Horsham and Stawell areas. So cultural safety, I think, is probably at its highest point that's ever been for families attending early years services here. And this is, I'm not just talking about kinders either, I'm talking about MCH as well. So when we first started, one of the first things we did was ESK enrolments at Stawell, and they had a 150% increase in the first year, I suppose, that we started to do some work. And they did a lot of work around building relationships with families, which then Bluebird did as well, and they had a 500% increase in enrolments. And then you have the MCH stuff in Horsham. They went from 70%, CAS visits, I think back in 2018, 2017, I want to say somewhere around then. And, last year they had 96% CAS visits in Horsham. And all that is really attributed. The 3 things that those guys did was build relationships with community. So it shows that if you're willing to put in the work, make places safe for families to go to and build relationships with them, the stuff that they do has huge, it just had huge, increases in, even attendance. Like at Stawell, I think it was at MARRUNG, the ESK enrollments increased and their non-attendances decreased because of the relationship building that they had. So, client feedback, using it to build your planning, and it has to be their feedback. Like if you don't take their feedback and do something with it, constructive, and it makes them feel part of the journey. So it makes them feel, that you're listening and you care. So they're going to use your service. When you just do the old mission mentality and, you get their feedback, but you don't really use it and you just do what you want to do, then you're not listening and you're not hearing. So, with all the feedback, you have to do something with it. It's no good collecting it and then just sitting. Even though we get really good outcomes, there's probably 3 or 4 little things that have happened to make those outcomes, which is what the PDSAs and that are for. The whole idea of, I know what we're trying to do today is just to say how the Best Start program works. And I think if you can translate that into getting better attendance in primary or secondary by doing some of these small things and making small changes, you get the big change that you want at the end. And people have to really remember that.
Yep.
I think meaningful feedback, at the start, whatever you collect is probably going to be a lot of criticism, but the schools have to be open to it, because if we don't figure out what's broken, we're never going to be able to fix it. So I think meaningful feedback around why attendance rates are so low is the first stepping point. And then once you've sort of got that feedback, I think then it's looking at, okay, what's a whole bunch, like we know what the big goal is of what they want to do is increase attendance, but what are the bunch of, changes that they could make either systems wise or people wise? When I say people, I mean like relationship wise, that they could change to help with attendance in, increasing. It can't be all reliant on the CESOs to fix a problem that's too big, say for the WIMRA, too big for 2 people. That's not going to how it work. You need people on board, community on board with what you're trying to do. Maybe they have working groups within the schools with parents. You have to do something in good faith. Even if it's the smallest thing, they then think, they might be looking to make some change. And if you do another small thing and then another small thing, all of a sudden people are starting to go, maybe they are trying. Maybe we should try and put in a bit more to, make it look like that we're doing our part. So one of the things I wanted to say is that if we don't get the education part right, it leads to other problems. So for the WIMRA, for example, Aboriginal people in the WIMRA have the lowest rate of employment than the rest of Victoria. How do we change that?
Yeah.
We have to have kids educated.
So what does an improvement approach look like in practice? As mentioned, the usual starting point is consulting with families and genuinely asking, what can I do better? For those of us that work directly with families, that will be important. For those of us who work indirectly with families, we need to ensure we're consulting with our career workforce and other ACOs, such as those who are joining us today, to ask what we can do better from a system perspective. The first step is identifying your sphere of influence and thinking about how that impacts career families. We need to think about what small changes in practice we can make that could positively impact career families. As Johnny highlighted, it's about the really small changes. And you brainstorm these ideas with your team and come up with as many ideas as you can think of. You align them with MARRUNG and Wernalungai. Then you prioritise those ideas and work out which ones you'll focus on first. It's okay if different change ideas are tested in the same team. As we acknowledge, and as is reinforced in MARRUNG, outcomes for Koori kids is all of our responsibility, and so is coming up with ideas on what we could do to change our practice once we've listened to how community thinks we can do better. But it's important that once we do, we run these ideas by the Koori community before we test them to make sure that these are appropriate. We ask CESOs, ACOs, community members whether our change ideas are good change ideas. We want to make sure that this isn't us deciding what is best for community. As Johnny spoke about, that mission mentality, but it is about coming up with ideas. When we check in, we need to take on the feedback we receive and be okay with being challenged. Sometimes you come up with what you think is a fantastic idea and someone from community tells you why it's not. That can be a really uncomfortable feeling and it can challenge you. But in an improvement approach to working, this challenge is a great thing. It's an opportunity to learn and grow and step out of our comfort zones to test a different change in practice. But it's important that we do something. We need to commit to making a change in practice over a month. We need to acknowledge that sometimes we want to try to change everything at once, but we are far more likely to be successful if we make small, highly focused changes and seeing what impact that has. These small intentional changes will have a huge effect over time, as we've seen in the DELKAIA Aboriginal Best Start space. After a month, we need to reflect on the outcomes and work out what we want to change next. How will we improve what we've just done? What have we learnt has worked? What didn't work? What will we do better next time? Commit to another change over the month. And we don't create an action plan for 12 months because that implies that we already know the solution to the problem. What we're trying to establish is an improvement mindset that says we don't know what the problem is. We think it might be this that's an issue, so let's test it and see. We might actually find that what we thought was the problem is not the problem at all. And then we need to regularly check in on our overarching measures. So for us, how is attendance tracking? Are we making inroads? Is there something more we can be doing? And so that is how we can use an improvement approach to focus on attendance, align our work with MARRUNG, and make very small changes in practice that will positively impact outcomes for Koori kids.